I watched the man walk through my front door like he owned the place, and my stomach dropped into my shoes. He looked exactly like Marcus. Same sharp jawline, same expensive watch, same way of moving through a room like the world owed him something. Except this wasn't Marcus. This was Brandon, and according to the hospital paperwork trembling in my hands, he was Marcus's identical twin brother. The one who supposedly didn't exist. The one Marcus had hired me to care for while he traveled for business. The one I'd been feeding, bathing, and watching over for the past 8 months, while Marcus paid me $45,000 a year to keep our arrangement completely quiet. "You must be Jennifer," the stranger said, extending his hand like we were meeting at a cocktail party instead of at the moment my entire life was about to implode. His voice was different from Marcus's, rougher, with a slight rasp like he'd been smoking since childhood. "My brothers told me all about you." I didn't shake his hand. I couldn't move. "Where is he?" Brandon asked, looking past me into the living room. "Where's the other one?" That's when I realized I had no idea what I was looking at, and everything I thought I knew was a lie. 3 years earlier, I was living the kind of life most people dream about. My apartment in Arlington was a 2-bedroom with hardwood floors and a view of the Potomac that cost me $1,800 a month. Reasonable for the DC area, especially considering I'd negotiated the lease myself. I worked as a freelance medical assistant, picking up shifts at 3 different clinics, which meant I had flexibility, but not security. The money was decent enough to cover my rent and student loans, but there wasn't much left over for anything else. Then Marcus Whitmore walked into the urgent care clinic where I was working a Thursday afternoon shift. He wasn't sick. He was there to pick up his brother's prescription, or at least that's what he told the receptionist. But when I called his name to go over the paperwork, Marcus looked up from his phone, and I felt something shift in my chest. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair graying at the temples, and the kind of suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His eyes were gray-blue, intelligent, and they locked onto mine with an intensity that made me forget what I was about to say. "I'm Marcus Whitmore," he said, standing up and walking toward me with his hand extended. His watch caught the fluorescent light as he moved. "And I think I'm about to ask you something that will sound completely insane, but I'd really appreciate it if you'd hear me out." That should have been my warning sign. Instead, I led him to a private consultation room, and he told me the story that changed everything. "I have a twin brother," he began, sitting across from me with his hands folded on the table. "Identical. His name is David. We were separated at birth. Adoption situation. Very complicated, very private. He's been living out of state, but he's very ill now. He needs someone to help him with daily living activities, medical monitoring, things like that. Someone professional, but also someone discreet. Someone who won't judge and won't talk." I should have asked questions. I should have wanted references, details, something verifiable. But Marcus had this way of speaking that made everything sound reasonable, like he was offering me a gift instead of asking me to step into something strange. "The salary would be $45,000 a year," he continued. "Cash payments, weekly. You'd work from my home in Georgetown. The role would be live-in, which means the guest house is yours. Full benefits, health insurance, everything. I just need discretion. My family situation is complicated. This arrangement is between us." I remember looking at his hands on the table. They were manicured, steady. Everything about Marcus was controlled and careful. "How long?" I asked. "I'm not sure yet," he said. "A few months, maybe longer, until David is stable enough to manage on his own, or until he didn't finish that sentence. But I'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about money." The guest house in Georgetown was beautiful. It was a converted carriage house with exposed brick, a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom with heated floors. Marcus showed it to me on a Monday morning, and I felt like I was stepping into a magazine spread. This was the kind of place I'd never be able to afford on my own. "When do I start?" I heard myself say. Marcus smiled, and it was the first time I realized He never quite smiled with his eyes. "Tomorrow," he said. "David's being transferred here tomorrow evening. I'll introduce you, and then I need to leave for a business trip. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. You'll have my number. Call any time you need anything." The man I met the next evening was nothing like his brother. Where Marcus was polished and sharp, David was soft and confused. He had the same face, the same bone structure, but something fundamental was missing. His eyes didn't quite focus, and he moved like his body was unfamiliar to him. "This is Jennifer," Marcus said, speaking slowly like David was a child. "She's going to help you while I'm away. She's very kind. You're going to like her." David looked at me for a long moment, and then he smiled, a genuine, uncomplicated smile that made my chest ache. "Hi, Jennifer," he said softly. I smiled back, and I meant it. For the first few weeks, the job was exactly what Marcus had described. I helped David with his medications. He was on several prescriptions for anxiety and something that seemed to affect his cognitive function. I prepared his meals, helped him shower, took him for walks around the Georgetown neighborhood. He was gentle and kind, and despite the strangeness of the situation, I grew genuinely fond of him. Then, about 6 weeks in, I found something that made me pause. I was changing the sheets on David's bed when a piece of paper fell out from under the mattress. It was a driver's license. The photo showed the exact same face as David's, but the name read Brandon Mitchell, and the address was in Portland, Oregon. The birth date was the same as David's. The eyes in the photo were sharper, more alert. I should have asked Marcus about it immediately. Instead, I put it back and tried to forget I'd seen it. The months passed. Marcus came home between his business trips, and each time he seemed more distant, more tired. He'd spend a few hours with David, checking in with me about medications and behavior, and then he'd disappear into his study or leave again for another trip. The cash payments arrived every Friday, and I tried not to think too hard about the driver's license, or about why Marcus had told me his brother's name was David when it was apparently Brandon, or about why he needed such extreme discretion. I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life. I was living in a beautiful place. I was helping someone who seemed to need help. I convinced myself that the inconsistencies didn't matter. But then, on a Tuesday morning in late August, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making David's breakfast when I heard a car pull up to the main house. I didn't think much of it. Marcus had said he might be coming home early. But then I heard raised voices, and one of them didn't belong to Marcus. "Where is he?" someone shouted. "Where the hell is my brother?" My hands froze on the coffee mug I was holding. David looked up from the kitchen table, his face going pale. "That's not supposed to happen," David said quietly. "He's not supposed to come here." "Who?" I asked, but I already knew. "David, who is that?" "Brandon," he whispered. "That's Brandon." And that's when the front door of the guest house opened, and a man who looked exactly like David walked in, his face twisted with rage and something that looked like desperation. "You," he said, pointing at me. "Where is Marcus? And who the hell are you?" I stood there, frozen, holding a coffee mug, realizing that everything I thought I understood about my situation was about to come apart at the seams. Behind me, David had gone completely still. In the main house, I could hear Marcus shouting into the phone, and I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. "Brandon," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Your name is Brandon." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Behind me, David made a small, wounded sound. "How do you know my name?" Brandon stepped closer, and I could see the resemblance now. Same face, same build, but where David's eyes were soft and confused, Brandon's were sharp and desperate. "Who the hell told you?" "I found your driver's license," I said, and the moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. "Under the mattress, 3 months ago." Brandon's jaw clenched. "And you didn't ask? You just..." "What, kept quiet?" I didn't know what was happening, I said. I still don't. From the main house, I heard Marcus shouting into his phone. His voice was different now, panicked, urgent. Get a lawyer. Get them now. I don't care what time it is. Call Henderson. The line went dead. Brandon turned toward the sound, then back to me. Where is he? Where's Marcus? In the main house, I said. I think he's calling someone. Of course he is. Brandon ran his hand through his hair, and I saw his hands shaking. Jesus Christ. Jennifer, right? That's your name? I nodded. Listen to me, Brandon said, and his voice changed, became something almost pleading. Whatever Marcus told you about David, about why he needs to be here, it's not the whole truth. It's not even close to the whole truth. David made another sound behind me, something between a whimper and a word. I turned to look at him, and he was staring at Brandon with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, something more complicated. David, Brandon said gently, moving around me. Hey, David, look at me. David looked up, and his eyes seemed to focus for the first time since I'd known him. It's okay, Brandon said. I'm here. I came to get you. No, David said quietly. Marcus said you're not safe. He said you hurt people. The words hung in the air like something poisonous. Brandon's face went white. Is that what he told you? Brandon looked at me, then back at David. He told you I hurt people? He said you were sick, David said. He said you got angry. He said that's why we couldn't see each other. I was starting to understand that I had been living in a carefully constructed lie, and I had no idea which part of it was real. Marcus appeared in the doorway between the main house and the guest house. He was still in his work clothes, but his tie was loosened, and his face was a shade of pale I'd never seen before. Brandon, he said, and his voice was cold. You need to leave. Now. Leave? Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not leaving without David, and I'm definitely not leaving him with you and your hired help. She's not your concern, Marcus said. She's been taking care of my brother for 8 months while you told him I'm some kind of monster, Brandon shot back. That makes her my concern. Marcus stepped fully into the guest house and closed the door behind him. He was doing something with his phone, his thumb moving rapidly across the screen. I've called the police, Marcus said. I've told them you're trespassing and threatening. You have approximately 7 minutes before they arrive. I suggest you use that time to leave. The police, Brandon said, and something in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. You're calling the police on your own brother? You're not my brother, Marcus said. Not legally. Not anymore. The words landed like a physical blow. Even I felt them. What does that mean? I heard myself ask. Marcus finally looked at me, and his expression was almost pitying. Jennifer, this doesn't concern you. Go back to your room. I'll explain everything tomorrow. No, I said. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to stand straighter. I've been living in your guest house for 8 months. I've been caring for David. I think it very much concerns me. For a moment, Marcus looked like he was about to argue. Then something shifted in his face, and he seemed to make a decision. Fine, he said. Brandon, sit down. Both of you, sit down. David, you should hear this too.
We moved to the living room of the guest house, like people in a trance. David sat next to me on the small sofa. Brandon took the armchair, his body tense, ready to move. Marcus remained standing, his arms crossed.
7 years ago,
Marcus began.
Brandon was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Severe bipolar disorder. He had an episode that resulted in him attacking his girlfriend. She required 14 stitches and a night in the hospital. Brandon was arrested, charged, convicted. He served 4 years. When he was released, the court issued a restraining order. He was not permitted to contact me or David.
I felt my stomach drop. I looked at Brandon, half expecting him to deny it. He didn't. He just stared at his hands.
David,
Marcus continued.
was 10 years old when it happened. He was traumatized. He watched our family fall apart. When Brandon was released, I made the decision to protect David from further trauma by not allowing them to have contact. David has spent the last 7 years living a normal, stable life. And now you've shown up and destroyed all of that. I didn't destroy anything, Brandon said, his voice hollow. I've been working. I've been clean for 6 years. I'm on medication. I've been going to therapy. I wanted to know my brother. I didn't want anything from you. I just wanted to meet him. You violated a restraining order, Marcus said flatly. A restraining order that you never told David was real. Brandon looked up at me, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Did he tell you that? Did he mention that David doesn't actually know why we're separated? That he's been telling David lies for years? Lies? Marcus's voice was sharp. I told him the truth. You told him I'm dangerous, Brandon said. You never told him I got help. You never told him I've been stable for 6 years. You never told him I got clean. You just left him in a house where he thinks his own brother is a monster. I looked at David, and I saw something I should have seen months ago. The confusion in his eyes wasn't just cognitive. It was the confusion of someone who had been deliberately kept in the dark. How much do you actually know about his condition? I asked Marcus, my voice very quiet. Excuse me? Marcus turned to me. David's condition, I pressed. What exactly is wrong with him? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He requires supervision and medication. That's all you need to know. That's not an answer, I said. Jennifer, I'm paying you $45,000 a year to ask as few questions as possible, Marcus said coldly. I suggest you remember that. The words should have hurt, but mostly what I felt was clarity. The money had always been hush money. The discretion hadn't been about David's privacy. It had been about hiding something. And I had been so grateful for the salary, so relieved to have financial security, that I had chosen not to ask the questions I should have asked from the beginning. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. You called the police on your own brother, I said to Marcus. I protected my brother, Marcus corrected, as I have been protecting him for the last 7 years. Brandon stood up. I'm not running. Let them come. Let them arrest me. At least then David will know that his brother isn't some monster. At least then he'll see what you're actually doing here. The sirens were very close now. David, I said, turning to him, do you want Brandon to leave? David looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he shook his head, very slowly. I want to know him, David said, his voice small but certain. I want to know my brother. Marcus's face went absolutely rigid. The first police car pulled up to the house, its lights flashing red and blue through the windows. And in that moment, suspended between the life I thought I had and whatever came next, I realized that everything was about to change. Not just for me, but for all of us. And I had just made the choice that would ensure it does. The police officers stepped out of their cars with their hands on their belts, assessing the situation with the kind of weariness that comes from breaking up domestic disputes in Georgetown on a Tuesday evening. There were 2 of them, a woman with her hair pulled back tight and a man with a neck like a tree trunk, and they moved into the guest house with the confidence of people who had done this 100 times before. We received a call about a trespasser, the female officer said, looking directly at Marcus. Can someone explain what's happening here? This man is in violation of a restraining order, Marcus said immediately, his voice steady and controlled. I have the paperwork. I've been trying to keep him away from my property and my brother for 7 years. That's bullshit, Brandon said, but he didn't move. He sat very still in the armchair, his hands visible, non-threatening. Officer, my name is Brandon Mitchell. I'm here to see my brother David. There is a restraining order, but it was issued under false pretenses. I was never given the opportunity to challenge it. The female officer's expression shifted slightly. Can we see the paperwork? Both of you? Marcus pulled out his phone and started scrolling. I have digital copies. The original was filed in D.C. Superior Court in 2017. The case number is… I have something better, I heard myself say. Every eye in the room turned to me. I have David. The officers looked at David, who had been sitting quietly on the sofa the entire time, his hands folded in his lap. He looked small and fragile under their attention, but he met their eyes steadily. David, the female officer said gently, do you feel safe right now? David looked at me first, then at Brandon, then at Marcus. The hesitation was everything. No, David said quietly. I don't feel safe with Marcus anymore. Marcus's face went absolutely white. David, you don't understand what you're saying. You're confused. I'm not confused, David said, and his voice was getting stronger. I'm finally not confused. Jennifer asked me a question nobody else ever asked me. She asked if I wanted Brandon to leave, and I said no. Because I want to know my brother. Because I've been told lies about him my whole life. We need to take this to the station, the male officer said. Everyone calm down. We're going to sort this out properly. No, I said. There's something else. Something you need to know. I walked to David's bedroom and retrieved the driver's license I had found 8 months ago. I had kept it, hidden in my own room, because some part of me had always known that I would need it eventually. I handed it to the female officer. She looked at it, then at David, then at the license again. This is your ID? David nodded. Brandon gave it to me when I was 16. He wanted me to know who I really was. But Marcus took it away. He said it was dangerous for me to have it. The officer looked at Marcus. Is that true? Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at David with an expression I'd never seen before, something between rage and panic. I want to understand the full situation, the officer said. Jennifer, you said there's something we need to know? What is it? I took a breath. I had spent 8 months taking care of David, 8 months accepting a salary that made no sense for the work involved, 8 months ignoring the inconsistencies that my instincts had flagged. But I had also spent 8 months getting to know a person who was kind and gentle and deserved better than to be imprisoned by his own brother. David isn't sick, I said, or at least not the way Marcus told me he was. I'm a medical assistant. I've been monitoring his medications, and they're not for any serious cognitive impairment. They're for anxiety. Low-dose anxiety medication. And the behavioral issues Marcus told me about? I've never seen them. David is functional, intelligent, and capable of making his own decisions. The female officer was taking notes now. How long have you been working here? 8 months, I said. I was hired through an urgent care clinic where Marcus came in. He told me David was his disabled twin brother who needed round-the-clock care. He paid me $45,000 a year in cash. He required absolute discretion. He told me David's name was David, but I found a driver's license that said Brandon Mitchell. That's because his name is Brandon Mitchell, the male officer said, looking at Marcus. Isn't it? Marcus stood up. I want a lawyer. I'm not answering any more questions without my attorney present. That's your right, the female officer said. But I'm going to need to ask Brandon and David some questions separately, and I'm going to need to understand what the nature of this living situation is. David, would you be willing to come to the station and make a statement? David looked at Brandon. Brandon nodded slightly. Yes, David said. I want to tell someone what's been happening. As the officers were preparing to take David and Brandon to the station, Brandon approached me. Marcus was being kept on the other side of the guest house by the male officer, who was taking his information and explaining his rights. I don't know your last name, Brandon said. I don't even know if I should be thanking you or asking questions. Jennifer Carlisle, I said. And you don't have to thank me. I made a lot of mistakes. I accepted money and didn't ask enough questions. I found a driver's license with a different name and didn't pursue it. I let myself be convinced that keeping quiet was the right thing to do. "You're the one who asked David what he wanted," Brandon said. "That's not a mistake. That's the first time in 7 years anyone has asked him that." The officers moved David and Brandon toward their car. As David passed Marcus, he paused. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and his voice cracked. "David, I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to keep you safe from him. From my own brother," David said softly. "You were trying to protect me from my own brother. That's not protection, Marcus. That's control." The car pulled away from the house. I stood in the guest house doorway, watching the red taillights disappear down the street. The female officer had taken my statement and told me I would likely be contacted by a lawyer representing David, or possibly by the district attorney's office if they decided to pursue charges against Marcus for false imprisonment or elder abuse. "What happens to me?" I asked her before she left. "That depends on a lot of things," she said. "Whether you were knowingly complicit in keeping David isolated, whether you could reasonably have known that the situation was abusive. A lawyer will probably want to talk to you. I'd recommend getting one yourself." After the police left, I stood alone in the guest house. The coffee I had made for David that morning was still on the counter, cold and forgotten. I looked at the beautiful space that had seemed so generous when I first arrived, and it felt like a cage. I packed my things that night. My clothes, my laptop, the few personal items I had brought with me. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and called a cab to take me back to Arlington. Marcus didn't try to stop me. He was in the main house, probably on the phone with Henderson, his lawyer, trying to figure out how to manage the disaster he had created. The next morning, I woke up in my old apartment, the one with the water stain on the ceiling and the neighbors who fought until 2 a.m. It felt like I had been living in a dream for 8 months, and I had finally woken up. My phone started ringing at 9 o'clock. It was a lawyer named Patricia Chen representing David. She wanted to meet with me. She had questions about the medications David had been taking, about the degree of isolation, about whether I had ever witnessed Marcus threatening David or preventing him from leaving. "I want to be honest," I told her when we met at a coffee shop in Arlington. "I was complicit. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. I was motivated by financial security, and that's not an excuse, but it's the truth." Patricia nodded. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a manner that suggested she had seen much worse. "The question isn't whether you're perfect. The question is whether you witnessed abuse. And based on what you're telling me, the answer is yes. You witnessed a grown man being isolated from his family, medicated without clear medical justification, and kept under constant supervision. Whether you recognized it as abuse at the time is less important than whether you're willing to testify to what you saw." "I will," I said. "Whatever helps David." The case against Marcus took 8 months to resolve. The prosecutors couldn't make a charge of false imprisonment stick. Technically, David had never tried to leave, and without explicit evidence that he had been prevented from doing so, it was difficult to prove. But there were other charges: financial exploitation, guardianship fraud, violation of David's civil rights. The restraining order against Brandon was vacated. The court found that it had been obtained through misrepresentation. Marcus had never disclosed to the judge that David had been sequestered and isolated, that his fear of Brandon was largely manufactured. I testified for 4 hours, describing the 8 months I had spent caring for David, the inconsistencies in his medical needs, the way Marcus had controlled every aspect of his life. I described finding the driver's license, my growing doubts, the moment I asked David what he wanted, and he said he wanted to know his brother. Marcus was convicted on 3 counts of financial exploitation and 1 count of violating the civil rights of an incapacitated adult. He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to David in the amount of $340,000. 8 years of the salary he had been taking from David's trust fund, while claiming he was merely managing it. David moved in with Brandon in Portland. Brandon had a job at a nonprofit that helped people with mental health issues reintegrate into society. He had a small apartment, and he gave David the bedroom and slept on the couch. They spent their first week together doing simple things, going to the grocery store, watching movies, talking about their lives. Brandon called me a month after the trial ended. He said David wanted to thank me in person, and would I be willing to video chat? David appeared on the screen looking healthier than I had ever seen him. There was light in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," he said simply, "for asking me what I wanted, for listening to the answer." "I'm sorry it took so long," I said. "It's okay," David said. "You helped me find my brother. That's everything." I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, listening to the couple next door arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. The water stain on the ceiling had gotten bigger. My student loan balance was still crushing. But something had shifted in me. I had spent 8 months being complicit in someone's isolation, and I had learned that complicity is easier than resistance. But I had also learned that the moment someone asks you to choose, even if you don't realize it's a choice, you have to live with that decision. And David had asked me to choose, and I had chosen him. I quit my freelance clinic work and went back to school for social work. It took 4 years, and it was harder than anything I had done before. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about David sitting in that guest house, being told lies about his own brother, waiting for someone to ask him what he wanted. I never heard from Marcus again. He served his sentence and was released on parole. I heard through Brandon that he had moved to California and was working as a consultant. He never tried to contact David. I don't know if that was genuine remorse or just an acknowledgement that he had lost. 3 years after the trial, I was working as a social worker, specializing in elder abuse and guardianship fraud. I had helped 14 families navigate situations similar to David's, situations where someone with power had used that power to isolate and control. Every single one of those families told me the same thing. They had known something was wrong, but they hadn't known how to challenge it. They had been afraid. They had been isolated themselves. I thought about the $45,000 Marcus had paid me. I had spent most of it on my education, on becoming someone who could help people like David. I wondered if that was redemption or just an attempt to rewrite the narrative of my own complicity. The truth is, I don't know. What I do know is that David is happy, that Brandon is his brother again, and that I am no longer the person who accepted silence as a valid response to abuse. The woman I was 8 months ago, grateful for financial security, willing to ignore inconsistencies, comfortable with other people's secrets, that woman is gone. And sometimes, when I'm sitting with a client who has been isolated or controlled, and they tell me they didn't know they had the right to ask for help, I think about that moment in the guest house when I asked David what he wanted. I think about how such a simple question can change everything. Because the truth is, we always have a choice. We can choose to see. We can choose to ask. We can choose to listen to the answer. The only question is whether we're brave enough to act on what we learn.